Welcome in, everybody, to another episode of Patrick Jones Baseball. On this episode, we have Josh Johnson. Josh is currently the associate head coach and recruiting coordinator at Mississippi State University for their softball program. He's one of the most progressive minds in softball. He's a pitching coach, so we go really deep into pitching in this episode and quite honestly talk a lot about things that you just don't hear very often from pitching coaches in across softball landscape at every level. So Josh is as someone who is very intelligent, but he also works extremely hard. So he's put in a lot of time, a lot of research over the years. He got a degree in psychology. He's working on his Ph.D. in biomechanics right now, and he's doing all this stuff while also being a coach at Mississippi State for their softball program. So very impressive guy. There's going to be some great pieces of information that you can take away in this episode that will help you from a development standpoint as a softball pitcher or as a coach as well. Josh has a book out. It's called 10 to Grow. I'm going to put that link below. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can click the link below. If you're listening to this, then you can just go and click the link in the show notes and it'll be there as well. So hope you enjoy this one. This is a fun episode. Again, I don't often talk to, someone who's so progressive in the softball world. So it's awesome to see that. And, one of the exciting things that, that I've been doing lately in the softball world is, I've been creating a product for softball hitters. So if you head to patrickjonesbaseball.com/softball, put your name and email in, and you will get instant access when this course goes live. So patrickjonesbaseball.com/softball, put your name and email in, and I'll be coming out with my new softball hitters course very soon. So check that out if you haven't already, and we'll make sure to get out some great information to you as soon as possible. So, ladies and gentlemen, here is now my episode with Josh Johnson. All right, we are now live with Josh Johnson, who is one of the associate head coach at Mississippi State University. Josh, thanks for coming on the show today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So I was doing some research on you. You've got a really impressive background just from an educational standpoint. I saw you psychology major, and then you got your master's in applied psychology, I believe, working on biomechanics degrees now. So I think it's cool that you clearly value both, right? The mental side and then understanding how the body works and things like that. And so my first question right out of the gate is, what are your thoughts on visualization, and do you like promote that to your players?
Yeah, when I was at Florida State doing sports psychology, one of the guys that was one of my main professors was big on visualization and mental imagery and all this stuff. And my thing is that everything we definitely we do that here. We have specific mindfulness sessions, especially when we get to 20-hour weeks with the pitching staff, and I walk kids through different mental imagery and stuff. I think just like anything, visualization and mental imagery has to be trained. It takes practice to get good at it. Some kids are really good at it right away. Other kids, it takes a while. But I think it has its place. And I think for me, at the beginning, when I was working in the sports psychology realm, my professors were all about talking about the best performance and the best performance. But to me, I find the most valuable imagery and visualization sessions are about mitigating the problems we have. So, instead of saying, "Oh, this is my best swing," or "I threw that pitch perfectly," it's like, now you'll have those moments, but also working in there bad things like say in pitcher visualization, you're taking them through an at bat, and then all of a sudden an error happens or they get smoked, and allowing them to react in a fairly fairly easy environment, allowing them to react to problems and situations. And research has shown that when you're doing visualization sessions, a lot of the emotions that you go through during the regular action, happen during visualization. And sometimes it's a great way to kind of put the kids in a situation where there's a bit of stress and you've got to work your way out, and learn how to cope and learn how to manage that situation. So I really like it for that. Um, there's obviously a lot of different techniques and ways you can go, but yeah, and we try to make it. It's more a part, I think, during the spring than it is the fall. In the fall, we're working more on the breath, goal setting, working more on developing some of the techniques of imagery, but also not really going into, okay, this is the game situation yet. We'll get there. We'll get there in the spring.
I think that's a great way to put it. If you're helping them prepare to how to deal with failure, right? And you mentioned just, like you said, having the pitcher is, imagines that, that, hey, just an error just happened behind me. Like, how do I not let that affect me going forward, and preparing them for that, which I think so many times, from like hitting, pitching perspective, we always just visualize the best thing, right? And we don't visualize what is probably actually going to happen from time to time, and making sure we're ready for that too. So I think that's
Mm-hmm.
a great point. You mentioned goal setting there. What can you take us through, like what you mean by goal setting for your players?
Yeah. So I I read a book called Measure What Matters, and outside of the title, which explains it perfectly, the big point of the book is the goal setting process that Google and some other big corporations use. But essentially, it's about objectives and key results. So your objective can be more of a broad idea, like I want to be a better pitcher this year. But your key results are really what drives the process behind those goals. So, in order for me to be a better pitcher, key result number one, I have to increase my spin rate by 100 RPMs. Key result number two, I need to command 60+% strike rate. Key result. And so, as you can tell, like the first one can be broad, wide open, which is, I think, where most kids, when they come into college, that's where they're setting their goals. Like, I want to be great. Okay, sweet. How are you going to do it? And the key results part, where I really like it, is the key results drive not only objectively measured things that that we measure on a daily basis, but then also, you're able to, you see, hey, how did I do? So say we have typically, in business they do 3 month cycles. We try to do more like 6 week cycles. So half of the semester, half of the semester. That way you have 4 cycles. But the idea is that at the end of it, you grade yourself. Hey, how did I do? Well, my spin rate's up 50 RPMs. Okay, cool. That's a 5 out of 10. Okay, my speed is up 2 miles an hour. I wanted 4. Okay, well, that's 5 out of 10. And down the road. So as you're hitting those goals, you can actually keep track of, okay, and actually quantify how good am I at my goals and my goal setting. Am I aiming too high? Am I aiming too low? And the people at Google talk about, they want to be at about 70. They want to be about 70%. So if you're hitting 100% of your goals are way too low. If you're like hitting 300 in your goal setting, you probably have way too high of expectations or goals. So it helps write the next set of goals. Plus, it gives you an objective timeline. This is where it stops. What are we measuring? That kind of stuff. And going back to what measure what matters, if spin rate is important in that program, it helps that the girls understand that they know where they want to go with it. And that to me drives the process, which is, of course, what we want, right? We want to drive process. So um, I like that method. There are a ton of other methods to goal setting. That to me is my favorite.
I like that because you make a goal, but it also, there's a plan that's built
Hmm.
within that goal too, on how to actually get there. That's what I like about it. And
Hmm.
I think, you had said earlier, players come in like, oh, I want to be great. And then it's like, well, how are you going to get there? Right. I mean, you can't just, will your way and not really have some type of plan. And I think, yeah, you said Measure What Matters is the name of the book.
Yeah, yeah. And the other thing too, I like to post them. That's the other key component.
Okay.
Post them so everybody can see, so that they're held accountable. And then beyond that, whenever it's a practice session, and say we're going through one of our more volume based bullpen, and I look over and I see a kid that's really not intentful about their command, and I go, "Hey, don't you want to hit 65% strikes?" Yeah. Well, are you working on that right now? No. Okay. Check back in. And then you have a constant reminder of, okay, and it's individual. So where's my process? And then you get other things like, okay, player A wants to work on a rise ball. Player B is very good at her rise ball. So she wants to work on her changeup. But player B goes, hey, show me how you're gripping your rise ball. Now you get collaboration too. So they start to talk to one another about, okay, what is it that um, helps you throw your rise ball? Maybe those cues will help me.
Mm.
So you get a lot more collaboration, you get a lot more team effort rather than, yes, they're individual goals, but you get a lot more team involvement in that. So yeah, Measure What Matters. By it's over there somewhere. Um, I'll get it for you. We'll get it for you. If nothing else, I'll email it to you.
Okay. And you mentioned that you post that like just like outside the locker room for everybody to see, or like what's the setup?
Well, for us, it usually was inside our bullpen. So
Okay.
we have our indoor had a sectioned off kind of bullpen area, and I would put it on the wall. They have since torn that down because we're rebuilding a brand new indoor facility. So now I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to do that. I've done it on Google Sheets where everybody on the staff is has access to the sheet. They don't. Most of the girls don't really look at it, but it is something for me to reference whenever we're working in the bullpen. So I'm not totally sure. We're doing most of our bullpen work outside, and chain link fences aren't great for that. So we'll see. I'll figure out a way. I'm slowly learning how life works without an indoor facility to ourselves.
That's awesome. I got a question. Why, you seem, I've talked to a lot of baseball and softball coaches, and you seem like you've done a lot of research. You've spent a lot of time, learning your craft, and you just seem like someone who has a growth mindset in general. Why did you why do you love softball, and then like more than, not want to say more, but why did you pick softball over baseball? Because I just listening to you talk, it reminds me a lot of the pitching coaches that I talk to in Major League Baseball. And so I guess
Mhm.
I'm, why'd you pick softball instead of going the baseball route?
Well, I think ultimately it was, softball is where I reached the highest level as a player. I mean, that's probably it. But when I was younger, I was introduced to fast pitch by my dad. He played, and that's where I hung out. When I was a kid, and I played college baseball at a D3. Wasn't great, but in the meantime, I came from Wisconsin, so there just isn't a lot of summer ball. 20 games isn't enough really to get better. So I wanted to play more. I started playing a lot of fast pitch to kind of supplement my work, and then just grew to love it. You know, I ended up being better at it than I was at baseball, and for whatever reason. And then I picked up pitching, and I kind of noticed that pitching was behind in the space. I felt like. And so I wanted to make an impact, and I felt like the softball pitching was going to be the best impact. I've coached hitting before. I was a JUCO. My first college job was a JUCO hitting coach. My first lessons job was primarily a hitting coach, learning how to do the pitching. And but I think that ultimately I looked at it and I said, "Man, this is where I can make the biggest impact on our sport." And so yeah, and obviously a lot of the people that I listen to, learn from, read about our major league coaches because they have the time to really kind of dive into another level of stuff. Whereas a lot of times, especially in different college programs, we don't have a lot of support. So we're doing a lot of stuff on the side. And, I'm lucky here. We have incredible support where where I'm able to dive into the biomechanics stuff, into the data analytics, that kind of stuff. Um, so I'm really blessed here, and we've got the facilities, we've got people across campus that are really helping us. So yeah, but back to your original question, that's kind of the path right there. Um, I love learning about baseball pitching, and I got driveline certified, and um, I love digging into that. And there's a chance that down the road, once I get done with the PhD process, that I start diving into some throwing. I mean, my son loves baseball. He's 5. The fact that he hasn't been in the lab yet is only because I feel like it's a little weird to throw clusters on a 5-year-old, but I'm not above it. I'm not above it. So, at some point I'm going to get back into the baseball side of things just for him, if nothing else.
When do
So,
you have time to work on your PhD when you're doing, you have like basically 10 other jobs as a college coach?
yeah, so COVID taught me a lot of things about how time management works and how everything goes. So, everything gets shut down, including our daycare. So I've got two young sons. One's 2, one's 5, and without a daycare, my wife works from home, so she didn't stop at all. She just kept going, and so now it's daddy daycare. And but I still had to recruit. I still had to go, uh, try to write workouts for athletes that wanted them, that kind of stuff. So we still had a lot of things to do, and then on top of it, trying to learn. Um, so I don't know what happened that clicked in, but it's all of a sudden it was like I could figure out how to change how I dealt with time and manage that better. And so, but remember too, the biomechanics, I'm learning about softball pitching. Like I research softball pitching.
Yeah.
So everything I'm doing there is helpful in my job, and then as we've been running biomechanics camps all summer, getting girls in the lab, that kind of stuff. That also helps not only learn more about pitching and start to dive into some unique variables that haven't been tested before, but then beyond that, it also helps develop interest in our program, because kids that really want that and want to be coached and want to be led in a player development direction, they crave that. So we've been able to bring a lot of kids in. I think we're starting to get the participants high enough to start to really draw some conclusions now. So as we start diving more into that, we're going to start finding more and more stuff, and it's only going to get better as we go along. So but in that, my relationships with all these other people have helped me also understand that giving a job to somebody that knows how to do it much better, much faster is is the way to go. I I tell you what, I've been learning Japanese for the last 2 years. I've been trying to learn Python, trying to learn how to do all this other stuff, and it's like when you really have to have someone speak Japanese, or you really have to have somebody that knows code, you just give it to them and go, I'll learn that. There's a step process, and a lot of that probably would take off after the biomechanics stuff gets done. But the
Why
PhD, I mean,
Japanese?
obviously Japanese. So Japan is the only other place that does research on softball pitching.
Oh.
And I remember um, Charles Poliquin talking about why he learned German and Russian. So this is a French Canadian, right? Strength coach. And he learned German and Russian so that he could read their texts on strength and conditioning. Because obviously they were at that time way ahead of where the US was. And so I thought about that. I was like, man, I want to learn Japanese to find out what they're writing, because that's going to open up a door to who knows what. And if I can leverage that someday to work in recruiting, I'm going to do that. Right now, I'm not good enough to speak anything, but I'm getting there. It is a tough language.
Oh.
Learning characters, it's another world.
What I was out at Driveline probably a month ago, and so I saw how they go about doing their pitching assessments, their their lab, everything that they do. I was out there for 3 days. How do you guys how is your motion capture lab work? Is it markerless?
So no, well, no, it's not markerless. So we have a cluster-based system. So instead of putting the markers on the bony landmarks, we put a cluster in the middle of the segment. And that cluster, all of the clusters have different. It's usually four markers per, and all of them have a different um, um, layout, so that it knows that this is the left upper arm, this is the right upper arm. It knows that this is the forearm and all that stuff. But in the process, you've seen Driveline do their process. Obviously, they strip guys down to their underwear
Right,
and do that. You can't do that with softball players. Like,
right,
that's not happening.
right,
So the cluster system actually helps us because we can. So we had to invent a suit, and that suit slides over. Well, what I learned was, you don't, on a cluster-based system, you don't have to have them perfectly placed, right? What you have to do is make sure that it stays in one place, and then you calibrate the body around that, rather than saying, okay, it's on this bony landmark, so now we know exactly where that is in space. That helps us. And so we had to invent a suit, we had to invent a hand cluster. All of this is going through patent processing too, but we had to invent this just out of necessity. So I have a professor here that he was like, I got a kid working on his honors thesis, and he wants to do 3D printed stuff. So we 3D printed a bunch of clusters to make it lighter and thinner, and then we took and then we're going to take that design and actually start making them out of aluminum, because they break real easy. Uh, we've learned that the hard way. But the hand cluster, we had to change it because in softball we make contact with this side of our arm. We'll make contact with the body, and so what it was, I mean, we broke 4 clusters before we realized that was not going to work. So so the first thing he and I did was design a cluster that could fit on just this side of the hand, and have the system still pull it up. So we were able to design that. I mean, it's rudimentary at first, but now we've kind of refined the process. But so it's a glove, and it doesn't get on the palm, so that a lot of girls, depending on their hand size, they don't have a gap. Baseball, you go to hold a baseball and you have this gap right here. Well, in softball, you don't have that. So a lot of girls have their hand blocked. So you can't have anything on the palm. You have to have that change. So out of necessity, we've had to create a lot of things, but the cluster system, I think, really helps us. Now, you probably met Kyle Wasserberger. He's one of the driveline biomechanists. He was at Auburn doing a lot of the research on softball. So he and I talk all the time. I'm constantly asking him about how to set up variables and how to create them in the motion monitor system and all that. So he's been actually the entire company has been a great resource, because essentially what we're trying to do is create their model of research, starting to compare slow throwers versus fast throwers, instead of comparing it all to a spectrum of velocity. So yeah, we're getting there.
Do you think that in like 5 years the softball world will be basically where baseball's at right now in terms of players? Because I mean, when I was out there, I mean, they have tons of players just going in for assessments, just pitcher after pitcher. I mean, do you see that same thing taking off in the softball world too, and really becoming apparent? Because you're the only person I be honest I've talked to that really in pitching for softball is like biomechanics, has a motion capture lab that they're talking about this
Right.
stuff. Do you think that that's the way softball pitching is going to go in the next 3 to 5 years?
I don't know. I mean, Right now we're kind of treading in, uncharted territory right now. So how long it's going to take for I mean, Driveline pops up, but then you also have a bunch of other people doing the same thing. And, now Major League Baseball is doing it a lot. Um, it'll, I think it might be longer than that just because it takes time and the equipment is expensive, so for the average facility to put in a motion capture system, it's expensive. There's one other group in Chicago called S2 Breakthrough, and they're doing a lot of this stuff. Um, and they have a biomechanist on staff, and so they're getting a bunch of data, but they don't have a motion capture system. If I could give them one, I would, because then we would be able to start doubling up our data. Um, but right now, I still think we're in the beginning processes. So I would say more 5 to 10 years, maybe you start seeing stuff like this. But we got to get more people to buy into it too.
Right.
I mean, there's still Major League Baseball teams that drag their feet on this stuff, and I mean, for people like you and I who see the value of what's going on, we like it. But even still, there's still people that are waiting, and I think that'll we've got to go through that process too.
I
So,
think I think players will help drive that change too. And I think,
mhm,
because just, I work with softball players now, and they want the information. They're getting, players are smarter now than they've ever been. They're only going to continue to get smarter with the amount of information out there in social media. So I think, players going into programs, and they'll start asking questions. And if there's the answers that they're not really looking for from a development standpoint, or, understanding, from an objective standpoint of why we're doing what we're doing, I think that's going to be just more benefit to someone like yourself and Mississippi State, where you guys are
mhm.
doing that kind of stuff. Have you, I saw recently that, because I've done this in baseball, like TPI, on base U. I've seen Dr. Greg Rose's, and those guys out there are now starting to do fast pitch softball. Have you seen that? And if have you done any research on that?
So their first pitching, they've got their pitching screen out now. I believe the first time that they presented it was this summer in San Diego, or maybe it's about to happen. I can't remember, but I've gotten to speak with Don Slott and Dr. Rose, and I think they're in the right space. They're trying to use motion capture to find what all this, and we movement screen our athletes. It's a bit of a hybrid from with some of the on base use screens with a few of the elite baseball screens that make a lot of sense. But I think that I think that I will try to get certified when I get the free time. But I think I'm interested to see it myself. I think that they've got a pretty good idea of what's going on. I wish I had the money and time to go through all of it: TPI, on base U, pitching, on base U, hitting, on base U, softball pitching, just to see the subtle differences.
Yeah.
And I've got a few other friends that we kind of talk about different screens and stuff like that are really big into PRI and SFMA, that kind of stuff. So it's I don't know that I know that on base U has gotten pretty close in a lot of things. So I'm interested to see what the pitching one looks like, and then go from there. But yeah, of course, it's one of those things. When it comes to new stuff like that, I'm always like one to learn. I always want to
Yeah.
go.
Yeah.
You know.
I'm hoping within the next 12 months or so, I'm going to try and do the fast pitch certification at some point. I've done, when I was with the Orioles, Dr. Rose and On Base U came down and spent a couple days with us and kind of talking through everything.
Mhm.
I love just talking to to Dr. Rose, because he's such a smart guy, but just the amount of information that in the players that they've tested. I mean, I know they've been testing fast pitch softball players for a long time in their lab out in California. So I think I am going to try and do that. But one of the things that I wanted to to specifically ask you, because we're going to have a lot of players listening to this, a lot of softball players, a lot of parents, other coaches, and you know a lot more about the data just because you've been doing it longer than I have on the softball pitching side. I mean, what are some things that softball pitchers, based on the data that you've seen or maybe have collected, what should they be focusing on in high school right now?
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I know you just brought it up, but I think the lowest hanging fruit every single time we do one of these biomechanics camps, the lowest hanging fruit is always a movement screen. It's always in there. And I think that, you know, being able to understand how you move, it doesn't mean you have to change everything, but it means so much if you're trying to do X movement and your body won't let you, then you have to fix either the movement or you have to fix your mobility or whatever it is, or not try to do that movement. And I think that to me, I think my first camp I didn't do the movement screen, and I said absolutely not going to do that anymore. I'm going to do that because it's just such valuable information, and you're right away you've got things you can fix and or help mitigate. And to me, that's where injury prevention comes from and all that. I also think that in high school, learning how to move properly in the weight room is huge. My advice to every high school kid, I don't care if it's baseball or softball, is if you're with a strength coach, just make sure that they're movement based, not just going for overall numbers.
Mm,
Because when you're number one, it doesn't matter. Like, I'm sorry, but there's no real good measurement outside of maybe the Proteus for rotational strength, and because of that, your squat isn't going to correlate with bat velocity or pitch velocity. Your deadlift isn't, your bench press isn't. So you get people that are chasing those numbers, you're in the wrong spot because those don't really translate to our sport. That doesn't mean you don't do them. It just means they don't translate. So talking about and understanding how to move properly to me is the easiest way to get better faster. And then the next part is if we're talking about softball pitchers, um, almost always when we throw kids on the Rapsodo, people don't understand the value of movement difference. So let's say you're a drop ball pitcher, and that's great. Your drop ball drops 5 to 8 inches somewhere in there. Um, you get it up to 10. Okay, great. What's everything else doing? Um, you get a lot of coaches that sit on a pitch all summer long, and so the development of a secondary pitch isn't there. And if all you do is play, you're never going to get better. And so many kids come down, and their movement profile literally has a dot right in the middle of the screen, and it's like, okay, they've sacrificed movement for velocity or movement for location, and it blows my mind. All of that can be worked on at the same time. I i just truly honestly believe you can do all of it and get better. And but you got to be able to identify those things right away to help you out. We have kids come to camp, and I mean, we had a kid come to our last camp who mowed everybody down, but her movement, I mean, she had less than 3 inches of movement, vertical or horizontal. And it's like that's not going to work in the SEC. It's just not going to work here. And so, not to say that I understand as a pitching coach, I'm going to have to add value. I'm going to have to make that better. But if you're starting with a 14, 15-inch spread, that's way better than starting with a 5-inch spread between your pitches. And now we've got to really stretch those out. You spend 2 years just learning pitches and how to command them in a game. So to me, I think you focus on the movement, make sure you can do that. The movement, getting more efficient as a mover will help your velocity, regardless of your mechanics. And then, obviously, throw the ball hard. Stop throwing 150 pitches in a bullpen session. Start throwing 75 as hard as you can, and with intent and doing all that. And I think you get a lot better faster.
What's your take on weighted balls for softball pitchers?
Love them. I I I have a saying in the bullpen where I say variability is a good thing. Variability is good. And when I grew up, it was all see if you can repeat the same motion over and over and over. Can you repeat it? Can you repeat it? And I've since learned that not only leads to injury, it also leads to frustration and a lot of times delayed learning. It takes forever to learn whenever you're just trying to do the same thing over and over and over again. So variability is good. So that means weighted balls are good. So um, we're in an on-ramping phase right now, but we'll go into weighted balls next week. Um, we throw plyo balls. We throw all kinds of stuff. Just some of it with full on intent, some of it not, but just trying to figure things out. And I think that goes with not just velocity, but learning pitches and being able to manipulate the ball with different weighted balls. That to me is super important. So we put them all over. I mean, I'm not talking about a 3-pound ball at a 100% velocity with a full pitch. I'm talking about, yeah, we throw the big black driveline ball, for a very controlled, simple movement. As we get lighter, we get more dynamic. And um, you know, I just I don't know how people don't do that. And I'm a big believer in the ecological approach. So I'm a big believer in differential training, which of course throwing different weights is part of that. So
Yeah, it makes sense why you would do that. Maybe in softball because it's underhand, and in baseball it's overhand, that people don't buy into the weighted balls to help increase velocity and help arm strength and things like that, and just overall health. I'm not really sure, but I am kind of surprised that more people haven't bought into that on the softball pitching side.
mm, yeah, sometimes it just takes a little while for people to figure it out.
Um, we just got done talking about, some of the things that, high school pitchers out there, and I'm speaking specifically to all the high school pitchers out there right now that, Josh is talking about. First thing is, how important it is to get a movement screen, and and just know yourself from a moving standpoint. And Josh, would you say that finding somebody who maybe has maybe not necessarily a background in softball, but maybe just, on base U certified or TPI or something to do this movement screen? Or do you think just the average strength coach knows enough to be able to help them with that?
I I just I know there aren't a lot of strength coaches that work in the private sector, and a lot of softball pitching coaches that work in the private sector that do that. Um, so I know it's hard to find. I don't think necessarily you need the movement screen from a softball person
Okay.
or even a strength coach. I think if you find somebody that knows what they're doing and knows what they're looking for, that can be helpful. And it doesn't have to be. I mean, if it's if it's a baseball coach or um, a golf coach, golf people that can take them through a TPI screen, like those things, because they come with your corrective exercises, and that to me is super important. So I would just do that. I think that um, when you find immobility, it could be a bunch of different things. It might be a coordination issue. My favorite explanation of it is Nick Winkelman, who have you read his book yet?
Yeah, he came on, like, he did some stuff with us when I was with the Orioles, so we did a bunch of Zoom
Yeah,
calls with him, and he was awesome. He was awesome.
love that dude, and I like the way he describes it. Sometimes it's a car problem, sometimes it's a driver problem, and you got to figure out which one is which. If it's a car problem, then you're probably talking about I got to do some mobility issues, that kind of stuff. If it's a driver problem, well, then it may be a coordination issue, and you just got to figure out which one is which. But here's what I know: until you fix the car problem, the driver is not gonna get any better.
Right. Yeah.
And, so you at least start there and go from there. And, like I said, with strength coaches, it's like, I used to be the person that didn't, that thought about numbers. And I look and I look and I watch and I go, man, that kid produces a ton of power, but is not very strong. How do they do that? And it's because they understand and how to move better than they understand how to move weight. And yeah, so it's cool to post a squat PR, and I get it, but if that's all you're chasing, I think you're in the wrong place. So I would say if you can get a strength coach that has that, go for it. Absolutely go for it. And don't worry about weight. That'll all come. But worry about how you're moving and being more efficient. I think that's just easy low hanging fruit.
Josh, what are some velocity numbers that you typically see for some of your pitchers that are coming in as freshmen?
So depending on and we're talking about pitching,
Right.
depending on the kid, right? So in our 22 class, we specifically wanted kids with high spin rate that move the ball. We were losing a couple of kids that did that well, so we needed to replace them. Their velocity came in, and it's like 60 to 62, but we're talking about on the Rapsodo 1500 spin rates in the right direction. They have 14-inch spreads on their pitches right when they come here. So and they asked me, well, what are we going to do when we get there? And I said, I'm going to sprinkle the velocity dust on you, and you're going to be great. you know, um, I've got other kids that walk in throwing upper 60s. Next year, we've got a kid that she's on a Rapsodo at 70 miles an hour. Um, Now she doesn't command it well, so guess where we're starting. But at the same time, I think it's typical that you're going to see either movement kids, and that kind of you can classify them however you want, but a movement kid that's going to be between 60 and 64, and then you'll have high velocity kids that'll be upper 60s. And obviously, we're in the recruiting process to try and get both.
Yeah.
So, you know.
Are there any cues that you hear on the pitching side that just kind of make you cringe every time you hear them? Like they don't ever really help, but yet you hear them time and time again from travel ball coaches, high school coaches, even like at the youth level.
Right. I would say that 90% of the cues that I hear, I just, you just have to, especially when I'm out recruiting, I can't help but listen. Um, you know, and the first of all, the internal cueing is just a rampant disease in our sport. Like everybody, twist your elbow, do this. It's like, oh, please don't. But that's also, but it goes back to, so 2 years ago, we get done with exit meetings, and two of my players said, look, coach, we know you like to do your ecological approach, which means you don't talk that much. A lot of it's implicit learning stuff, but we need you to talk to us. We want you to talk to us. And that's why I read Nick Winkelman's book, so that I could get better at understanding the language that I needed to use with players. And so, when I hear internal cues, that's a big turn off. That's a swipe left or right or whatever that is. But then, but then, you know, I think that just the non-specific cues that don't mean anything. And we're all creatures of habit and feedback. So, it'll be dad or coach who are, um, you know, will say something like "twinkle your toes," and the kid will throw one good pitch in a lesson or a bullpen session, and now dad can't stop saying that. And at this point, nobody knows what it means, including the kid. And it's like, okay, well that's an ineffective cue, right? But then you hear it over, over again, and it's like, man, that's not it, And so I would say internal cues, just in general, which is about 90% of what I hear, are just stop. Just think there's a way you can create an external cue out of any internal cue. And you just got to be creative. And then I love metaphors. You just don't hear metaphors. Metaphors are a great way to learn, um, but you just don't hear them. And you know, like I said, I keep pushing it, but man, it's just the book was a life changer when it came to how to learn how to talk to kids, and it can be learned as a coach. I think that a lot of people are intimidated by like changing a language, but it can be learned. It's not that hard if you just try.
Man, I hope everybody who's either watching this or listening to this, just tips their hat right to you, Josh, and really just for you, I mean, just listening to you tell that right there where, you really were in on the ecological approach. And I'm sure you still are to some degree, but, you had players who, wanted you to start speaking up more. And the reason I bring this up for everyone who's listening or watching this is, Josh didn't immediately just say, oh, I'm just going to start talking more. He went and did research on, okay, what's the best way to go about talking to players and actually coaching and not just saying stuff just to say stuff. And I think that's awesome to hear. And I just, I just want to emphasize that because I hope that there's other coaches who are going to be listening to this or watching this on YouTube and they start doing the same thing and take it that serious where, you're not just doing stuff just to do stuff, but it's backed by research. It's backed by people who like Nick Winkelman, who wrote the book, The Language of Coaching, who literally just studies how to go about,
Mm-hmm.
giving him, what to say to players and analogies and cues and things like that. So I just wanted to commend you on that. I think that's fantastic. My next
Thank
question I
you.
had for you, which I think somewhat goes into what we've been talking about. I think for me, what I've seen is players learn best a lot of times through visuals, like being able to visually show them, at least maybe more so on the
Mm-hmm.
hitting side, because that's more my background than the pitching.
Mm-hmm.
Do you use a lot of video when you're trying to show changes to a player that you want them to make?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I think exactly what you're saying. What we're trying to do, I think, as coaches, is try to reach kids at their level. And I try to offer kinesthetic, verbal, and visual cues to everything we do, so that we understand. Okay, two of these things might not work, but that video might have kicked it in. Especially learning pitches, we use video constantly because seeing what happens when you're trying to manipulate a ball. I mean, at 40 miles an hour, when your hands moving through the end of the pitch, you're trying to manipulate a ball. That's going to be hard for a coach to even. Definitely, no words are going to work, right? And sometimes a kinesthetic cue can work, but that it's got to be video based, and so we do utilize that a lot. I think in the mechanics side we don't as much, and the reason why is I don't want kids to think that one movement is effective in changing an entire pitch, right? So I try to develop drills that kind of force or implicitly teach a certain movement, and that I'm trying to get them to create. And I give them specific, maybe a goal. Like, okay, if we're trying to learn how to sequence our kinetic chain better, then I'm going to get you to think about the first part of that chain, right? The beginning of that chain. And I'm going to give you a cue, um, external, of course, right? External cue. But that leads to that goal, right? And then develop a bunch of drills that kind of work in that way, so that if the goal is always the same, and their movement solution is going to look different than their teammates, but that doesn't matter. You're just trying to get them a little bit better each time, and get them to find their own way of doing something. I had kids. Our best pitcher at the end of last year was Annie Willis, and she's not like she'll even say she's not super athlete. She's athletic for a kid that was a lifelong pitcher, right? but she was, we constantly had her doing drills to work on kinetic chain. And when she got here, she was 62, 63. She left around 70, and um, and was able to manipulate pitches and all that stuff. But I I do the drills that way so that they don't have to think about it and they can still work at top velocity while they do it. Because what I find is a lot of people do submaximal training, and then that never translates to the next thing. And so we not only do we want them to do everything at high velocity, but then we on top of it, we want them to spin their pitch while they do it. So change the pitch every time, and keep it as variable as possible while trying to focus on the thing. And I mean, I'm notorious for starting to tell stories about my kids in the middle of a bullpen session just to throw the vibe off, just so that they stop, so they have to concentrate more. My kids think it's hilarious, but and the people that know what I'm doing, it takes them everybody that's in the bullpen, they don't realize what I'm doing until they do, and then they're like, I was focused and then I lost. But that's part of the point. The game is going to be all over the place. You're never going to be that locked in, and if you are, you're probably missing something. Baseball and softball isn't about like this tunnel vision like Tiger Woods can get. You're talking about things are happening around you. Even as a pitcher, I get that you control most of the game, but you have to be aware of what's going on. So you can't be so locked in that you forget to cover home plate, on a pass ball, or you forget to do this and that. It can't be that way. So in the process of trying to develop all of this, right, all of this, there's got to be a video component. Yes, right. I like to pick my spots. I like to pick my spots for the implicit learning. I don't think that you can do a lot of pitch training. You can, but you can't on implicit, learning implicitly. And I think that, when it comes down to it, we watch a lot of game film to really help to understand, like, what are we trying to do here? What is the main goal of what we're trying to accomplish? And let's use our game video to understand that. So, and shoot, we do. I mean, I do video on my pitchers to make sure that nobody can pick the pitch from the side. I mean, we use all that, and we'll sit there and watch it together. And when we see something, we're like, "Yep, that's it. Let's go after it." So, yeah. And I mean, I'm also a big believer in having the kids drive their own training. So, I want to show them video so that they can say, "Hey, I noticed this. I mean, I'm not perfect. I don't catch every single thing." So having, 8 to 10 eyes on everything we do helps me help them because they help themselves.
Love that. I think that's very, very well thought out. And, I'm not surprised, being how much, how careful you've been and how tactical you've been, and how you go about using video with your players. What's your take on player plans? Like, when your players show up every day, is there a plan that they have in place for them that they know exactly what they need to do? Or is it more so like just kind of you provide a framework, and within that there's some variability, and there's options for them?
Right. So each one of them has we kind of have like the same skeleton, right? So it'll be, okay, we're going to drive, we'll have correctives, activation, that kind of stuff, the bands, all that. I mean, the warm up looks like this big block, but it really is only like 10 minutes of work. And then when we get to, um, and we can do a lot more bullpens than baseball pitchers, so we have a huge advantage in that. But so once we get to, so we've got, a lot of things that are the same. When it comes to the bullpen, it's like, okay, now we have our individual thing. So we start off individual with the correctives, we end individual with the bullpen session. Obviously, the activation can be the same. For the most part, we're trying to activate the same things anyway, so it doesn't matter. And then the cool down's the same. Um, and I also allow for like variability within those. So I'm not the one harping, you got to do it this way. That's not the case. A lot of time we do a med ball throw every day, as part of our priming, to get the muscles firing and all that. And my only cue is ever just throw it as far as you can, or throw it as hard as you can. That's it. Jumps, we do the same thing with jumping. But I think at the end of the day, the bullpen, the part where they're actually doing their work has to be individualized. Now, for each of them, that'll look a lot the same. They're pitching in the lane, they're throwing to a rep set and all that stuff. But what we throw and where we throw it, there's obviously variable, right? And specific to the kid. So, as we're developing that stuff, a lot of it, again, going back to those goals, going back to those process goals, we sit there and go, okay, you're working on command. So let's fire up, whether it be targets or whatever we're going to do, let's focus on that and make that part of what we're doing.
Love that. Josh, this has been a ton of fun. But before we wrap everything up here, I do want to add, you do have a book out, Tend to Grow, right? We'll put the link in the show notes page. And for everybody, again, who's listening to this, watching this, I mean, you're listening and watching to, probably one of, if not the most progressive pitching mind in all of softball. And, I think that, if you can continue to learn and some of the things that, he's spent years and years researching and, putting time in, and honestly, just helping the game grow, do that. I would highly recommend it. Again, it's called Tend to Grow. We'll put the link in the show notes. But Josh, appreciate your time. Appreciate you just, pushing the game in the right direction. And I'm sure as time goes on and, maybe after I get with this certification with, fast pitch on base we can do another podcast and talk some more shop. But appreciate you coming on, man. It's been a lot of fun. Carlton Salters actually recommended you, so I was looking for someone to do some pitching stuff for softball. And he's like, oh, he messaged me. He's like, oh, you got to get Josh Johnson on the show. Like he's an awesome guy. He's willing to share and collaborate and grow. And he was 100% correct just based off of, our episode today. So appreciate, him for recommending you and for you coming on the show and just sharing everything that you have.
Well, thank you. That's strong praise there, and I appreciate it. And yeah, we do another round. We should get Carlton in on here because the two of us rap, and it's. I mean, I find that just because he's works in hitting doesn't mean he doesn't think about pitching, and just because I'm a pitching coach doesn't mean I don't think about hitting. And the two of us, when we get going, it's usually pretty good banter. So. We could all get together and talk about, to me, the screening process, especially once you get through that, be interesting to see. Okay, let's see what this is. Let's see what we like.
Well, and to see also because I mean you deal with a lot more pitchers than I do, so maybe it's you see like, well, this would work. I think this is something that we could maybe take. I don't know about this, or just trial and error. And I think that's how you grow as a coach and help more players.
That's right. That's right. That's exactly it. And I mean, those conversations are a lot of how my personal development has come from. Even in conversation with people who just challenge your ideas, it just like it. My 5-year-old, why? Well, but if you can explain it a why to a 5-year-old, you can probably do it to just about anybody. And so that to me, those are exercises I think in becoming better at what you do is just to constantly try to explain what you're trying to do. And that just makes you better. So yeah, we've had some good banter, and I really appreciate you having me on. This has been a lot of fun.
I appreciate you.